An email from Kevin for you, Mr. President. If there is another relief bill, how can we stop lawmakers from dipping into it again for special interest projects? Man, we were just talking about this. Do you want to expand? Can we stop the next one?
It's just the common facts. I mean, they have a majority in the House, and therefore you need their vote, and they want to get certain things. I will tell you this. If you look at before and after, the things they had in there were crazy. They had things, levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again. They had things in there about, election days and what you do and all sorts of clawbacks. And they had things that were just totally crazy and had nothing to do with workers that lost their jobs, and companies that we have to save. So, look, it's an amazing bill because it gives us great flexibility on saving the workers and saving the companies, and that includes small businesses. Massive amounts of money are going to be put into small business, and it's going to help. Look, we want to keep the businesses open. We want to keep the jobs going. But if you would have looked at this bill before and after, you would have seen a tremendous, we thought we were going to walk away from it. We actually thought we'd have to walk away. We did walk away a couple of times, actually, but we thought we were literally going to have to walk away and start all over again. They had so much junk in there, and it was junk. Much of it was junk.
It's almost like Trump doesn't know that when he shows up on Fox News, the rest of us can still hear him. Because here he is admitting what Republicans have clearly been saying behind closed doors for years, only Trump lacks the awareness to not say it out loud. And that is that if we actually allow people to vote, Democrats will win. The guy literally says that the bailout bill has levels of voting that if you ever agree to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again. This is the president of the purported greatest democracy in the world admitting freely that if his party deigns to actually allow its citizens to have a voice, that they wouldn't be able to hold onto power. I don't know who needs to hear this, but every American should be allowed and encouraged to vote in this country, not just the conservative ones. Now, Trump tries to pretend that expanding the right to vote is some completely unrelated pork that has no place in this bill. He says, quote, "It has nothing to do with the workers who've lost their jobs and companies that we have to save." And sure, it might not have to do with the workers or the companies, but it still has to do with the pandemic. I don't know if he's had time to realize this, but there is a viral outbreak sweeping across this country. It's not safe to be outside or in groups or, in long lines heading into confined spaces to get to a ballot box. The solution then is to ensure that all Americans can still exercise their most fundamental right to vote and can do it safely, because we shouldn't have to choose between voting and surviving in this country. And yet even the threat of imminent danger hasn't stopped the Republican Party from refusing to make it easier to vote. For example, Alabama's Republican Secretary of State, John Merrill, has allowed voters to use the outbreak as an excuse to get an absentee ballot, but for that ballot to even get counted, voters need to get an affidavit signed by 2 other people or a notary public. And when the entire point is to avoid other people and practice social distancing, finding 2 other people or even a notary kind of negates the entire purpose. Merrill went on to say that the only people suggesting loosening regulations on absentee or mail-in voting are, quote, liberal extremists. And look, the reason that Republicans who govern more rural areas are refusing to take this seriously is that the outbreak is primarily impacting urban areas, which typically vote Democratic. And so rather than acknowledge that this is a crisis and pass measures that'll help people in cities, Republicans would rather continue to enact roadblocks that lend themselves to their party's ultimate goals, which is keeping voting low, in that higher turnout helps Democrats while low turnout tends to favor Republicans. In other words, people like John Merrill and other Republican politicians who refuse to expand voter access, even in these unprecedented times, are effectively embracing the effects of this outbreak by leveraging the fact that people won't be able to go out and vote unless they want to risk their lives. They're using this pandemic to push an agenda of voter suppression, in case you were wondering about the level of depravity at work here. But what's worse is that this virus is clearly expanding rapidly from state to state and won't be isolated just to cities. And when it ultimately hits suburban and rural areas, having enacted all of these roadblocks to voting isn't going to help the GOP. In fact, their most reliable voting bloc, who are older voters, are the most vulnerable population, meaning that they'll actually be hurting their chances in their desperation to get as few people to vote as humanly possible. Of course, by that point, I wouldn't be surprised if suddenly we see Republicans warming to the idea. Now, in fairness, I do have to mention that not all Republicans are refusing to take this seriously, considering there are a number of Republican governors, like those in Ohio, Maryland, and Massachusetts, who've taken quick action. But it's Republicans in Congress who are blocking proposals such as the one by Senator Ron Wyden and Amy Klobuchar that would expand vote by mail across the country. And it just goes to show that the GOP's priority was never serving the American people or keeping them safe or responding appropriately to this crisis. It was ensuring that they stay in power by any means necessary.